Okay, so just as a quick recap, you go into the modes panel here, click on landscape, and it brings up this procedural menu for you. Now, in here, we can immediately assign a material, and you got a drop-down list where you have access to materials, but we're going to be custom creating a material from memory. And we can locate this in space. Ideally, I want this already located at world 000, and it's given me some Z depth. I'm actually going to line this up with my static mesh. So I need to kind of get this, and you get a nice widget so you can sort of line this up with your world, right? And actually, stupid middle mouse button scroll wheel not working. Thank God. All right. So in this particular case, I'm going to drop this down to the level of about there-ish. And so this habit I generally developed over time. And that is to come in here and just, what was that, 550 was it? Just punching in even numbers, right? So I've noticed something with calculation intensive stuff inside of Maya, Unreal, any 3D package, right? If you make adjustments and leave a floating point decimal, it actually leads to a greater chance of things erroring out. Now think about it. If I were to ask you, you know, what is 7 multiplied by 2.556312. You can't think of that instantly, right? Well, it's the same thing with calculations that are happening in the background. Whereas if I go, what's 7 times 10? Boom, you know, straight away. And I've found that there's a small kind of performance boost if you round up numbers to make for easier, cleaner maths. Also, when you come back to an asset later, you're just like, oh, okay, really, you can orient yourself really, really quickly because things are nice, even numbers, right? Again, it's not going to happen in all cases, but okay. So section sizes, we're going to leave the default, but this affects what happens with a landscape is that there's an operation called a quantization, and what it does is it breaks everything into these large quads, or just cuts it up into manageable pieces, and we can set the resolution per quad, right? But we'll leave it at the default, and overall resolution, yeah, let's leave it at the default for now, and I'm just going to hit. Oh, let's, instead of extending this out to a grid, let's take a chance and fill that world. Ooh. So that's going to extend ad infinitum out into space. All right, and let's create that. And so now we've got access to some wonderful sculpting tools that will allow us to sort of fashion our world, right? And this is the fun bit, just going in with your sculpting brushes. I'm just trying to figure out why. Oh, there we are. Oh, okay, they've moved it. All right. So we've got our paint tools here, sculpt tools, and our management menu up in here. It used to be up here, right, inside the landscape UI. But that's cool. So I'm going to go over to my sculpting brushes, and inside here you've got smooth, flatten. You got an erosion brush. I've never tried this, so this is kind of cool, right? So I'm going to go in. It's eroding things back. The hydro brush. This is cool too. Never used that as well. So you can get troughs of water that you can build in there. Let me undo those. But basically, I'm just going to go in with a sculpting brush. Let's see what other brushes you got there. Ah, yeah. I'm going to expand this out because there's one other facet that I want to talk a little bit about in terms of the brushes that you have available for you here, and that's up in here. You can choose to load in an alpha, right? And then if this is a default alpha texture. I wonder if I've got any alphas in there. I don't think I do. But you can customize your brushes, right? So you can have like whatever. This is actually kind of cool, even though it's just a checkerboard pattern, because it's got this rotational aspect to it that allows me to create kind of a bumpy sort of surface. And then it's just a matter of looking up reference material and kind of going to town with it, right? So in this particular case, what I need to do is I need to kind of sculpt what this mountain range is going to look like in the background. So I'm going to take a look at this radius and see if I can crank it up a little bit, and then just make kind of larger forms, right? Now, what I would used to do back in the day is I'd start off with a height map, because the height map would give me the default rise and fall that, you know, as an artist, I'd have to sit and think about, like, how did the wind affect and how did the gravity affect this particular area, and where is it geographically located, and on top of that, how can I make it look artistic, and et cetera, et cetera. But with a height map, you can get, you'll have a nice little default you can get started with. But I'm just going to really sort of quickly rough this out. This area is supposed to be kind of abandoned and just sitting in the middle of nowhere. Nobody's seen it in hundreds of years. So I'm just going to bracket it on either side with some basic sort of mountain textures. Now, the interesting thing about alphas is I always encourage artists to experiment with alpha textures, because what you think you might get, like I was looking at a checkerboard pattern going, oh, I don't want that. What you think you might get, you'll be pleasantly surprised at what actually happens when you start applying that alpha, right? Okay, that's enough to sort of get started. What I might get you guys to do, actually, even though this is just, I've only just talked to you for like a minute or two, why don't you guys dive in to an open session of Unreal and just have a muck about with the landscape? Because I talked to you all through the first hour, a couple of hours this morning, right? So it'd be nice if you guys just dive into Unreal and get your hands dirty a bit, right? So you don't have to have any sort of objective in mind. Just open up Unreal, create a landscape, and just start painting a mountain range and then posting the screenshots up, right? So do you guys want to do that? Yeah, nothing fancy, just like half past 12 or so. If you guys already have an existing project, this is a good place to start. Now, before I let you go, the one reason why I wanted to talk about terrains and how important it is that it was a huge objective of me. One of the positions I had in my career was as a lead environment artist. And the one thing that I hated at the time was that all the environment artists that were on the team would always model a flat freaking area, right? And for me, I just thought, you know what we should do is we should model the earth below that environment and then build on top of it like we would normally, like people would normally when they're building neighborhoods. So city planners will take into account the environment, right? Some people thought I was crazy. They're like, what? It's a video game, Al. We don't have to model the earth before we create a city on top of it. I'm like, no, you don't understand. We want to get believable terrain, right? And then build a city on top of that. And I feel somewhat vindicated that landscape artists and terrain artists are now a separate discipline in terms of an environment team. And yes, it's very, very important to build the terrain first. Now, your guys' temptation will be to just dive in and start modeling a building straight away. I encourage you to start thinking about putting your landscape down first, then putting in your set dressing props, especially if you're dealing with something that takes place on Earth, contemporary, out in the middle of nature and things like that, right? So that's just a note for when you guys are designing levels. As much as possible, you want to get away from rectilinear level design unless you're doing a sci-fi game, like on a ship somewhere, right? And then you can get away with it. Okay, so there we go. Give it a try, the landscape tool. Just open up any blank project inside of Unreal, and then I'll pop in at 1/2 and we'll talk a little bit about landscape materials. Okay, cool. Oops. I didn't want to hang up. I just wanted to mute. There you go.